Welcome to Postwave. You're here with Eric and Trevor. So, Eric,
Yeah.
what is it like to be Eric?
I scream and I hear things reflected back at me, and that's where I know where they
That's how you know you exist.
are. Yes. Similarly, that is the experience of every metal band.
Although probably they're playing their guitar so loud they can't hear the echo.
Yeah. I think this extended metaphor went a little bit too far.
Maybe.
Um, yeah. So today we're talking about article "What's It Like to Be a Bat" by Thomas Nagel.
Yeah.
So Trevor, how did you come across this article?
Uh, I think I had heard it mentioned like various times in like uh some philosophy podcasts I listened to, like a couple different ones.
Hmm.
Um, and just kind of like in passing or like yeah, just referencing Nagel's essay, "What is it like to be a bat?" And
Hmm.
yeah, and I think Very Bad Wizards did like a whole episode on it, and that's when I decided to finally read it.
So
Um,
now we really are copying very bad wizards. If you're listening, guys, we love your stuff and
yeah.
super inspired. Keep up the good work.
um, yeah,
So,
I didn't realize how old it was, but it was written in 1974, which is like almost 50 years ago now.
yeah, it really must have been groundbreaking at the time.
Hmm.
I guess that's probably why it's so influential.
Yeah.
This was a really compelling article. I really thought it was speaking to a lot of truth,
Hmm.
stuff that it maybe isn't the most obvious, or at least the way I feel like the way a lot of discussions about perception and reality tend to go is a lot of the people I talk to kind of speak as though they haven't heard this perspective, and that's why I think this can be such a valuable piece of work.
Yeah, yeah, and it's pretty humble and like not making any big claims about what we actually know. It's more of uh, a criticism of people who say that they figured it out, and it's a simple explanation.
Yeah. Um, so it starts with talking about this idea of semantic externalism. I had to look up what this is. Um, do you have a concept of what that means?
Let me look at where it's mentioned.
Sure. Well, I'll just tell you right now. I have the quote from Wikipedia. Semantic externalism is, in the philosophy of language, semantic externalism is the view that the meaning of a term is determined in whole or in part by factors external to the speaker.
Hmm.
So what does
Yeah.
that mean to you?
uh, factors external to the speaker. So not external to the word, but factors external to the speaker.
Hmm. So what I think it's getting at here is like, if you see lightning and you say it's lightning, it doesn't matter your perspective on it. It is what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that word lightning, even if you don't know what lightning is on a fundamental level, it's still lightning.
Yeah, is it kind of saying that even if two people think different things about some phenomena, that it is whatever it is, separate from that?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Is that the same thing as saying there's like an objective reality that's different than what we're
Mm.
perceiving?
Yeah, I think it's uh, very closely tied with that idea, and that jumping way ahead to the end, he talks about how further understanding in objectivity versus subjectivity is necessary in order to really grasp this idea.
Yeah, yeah, because it's not as simple a distinction as it might seem,
Mm-hmm.
like what that actually means. Yeah, I like the where's the part where he mentions what the word is means when you're like explaining to like a kid how something works.
Uh-huh.
Like the it's the matter is energy thing.
Yeah, right.
And you can say that and someone can think they understand that, but they don't actually understand it unless they like learn about relativity and stuff. And but there actually is an explanation for
Mm-hmm.
why matter is energy. And we don't have an explanation like that for consciousness.
Yeah.
You just have to say like information processing is consciousness, or the
Mm-hmm.
brain structure is producing consciousness or something.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that he says, one of the main points of this article is, I do not deny that conscious mental states and events cause behavior, nor that they may be given functional characterizations. I deny only that this kind of thing exhausts their analysis. So I think what he's saying here is that you can have uh, a reductionist materialist perspective that says, like thoughts are only the mechanical structures in the brain. Um, and like, while it is a self-sufficient model to have that kind of explanation, it's not catching the whole picture because it can't explain consciousness. It leaves consciousness out altogether, and so it can't explain it.
Right, it's leaving the subjective part out. It's like not even mentioning the subjective part. So like
It,
how can it explain how the subjective part connects to the
yeah,
what's happening in the brain?
yeah, exactly. So before we go any further, why don't we give a little summary of what this article is about?
Yeah. Um so the title of the article is "What is it like to be a bat?" And it actually predates the term hard problem of consciousness by about 20 years, I think a little more than 20 years, because that was coined by David Chalmers in the 90s. But it tries to, I think the main point is that it tries to come up with this, like the, even just the question of what it means to be conscious. And basically what he comes up with is this, what is it like kind of language? Like, what
Mm.
is it like to be a person?
Yeah, and he uses this metaphor of being a bat.
Yeah, and I think that the reason he says he chooses a bat is that, well, it's a mammal, right? And
Yeah.
most people would agree that mammals are conscious, because
Mm-hmm.
they're similar enough to us. Um, but they're kind of alien enough in that they use echolocation, and that's like their main mode of perception, which is fairly hard for us to comprehend what that must be like
Mm-hmm.
subjectively. Although he does say like blind people can learn to do some kind of like course version of that.
Yeah, and in fact, I saw a TED talk by a guy named Daniel Kish, who is blind from birth and has learned to navigate the world using echolocation.
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah. And ever since I saw that, I have actually kind of been more aware sonically of this sort of uh, phasing effect that happens with sounds reflecting off of objects.
Yeah, and it's a slight tangent, but people
Mm.
have also developed these devices that will like vibrate in specific ways, and they can help people who are deaf hear. Or I think that's the main thing right now. But they can actually distinguish fairly quickly. They can learn fairly quickly to tell what different sounds are just from different patterns of vibrations in their. I think it like goes on their wrist or something,
Wow, cool.
or like is worn in a pack on their body. And we're recording this like a week or so after Elon Musk did this kind of like highfalutin demo with Neuralink. And I don't know, a lot of people are saying like the far more like practical and more within reach path is these kinds of like sensory augmentation
Mm.
with like more less invasive means.
Yeah.
Kind of simpler means.
Yeah, I've seen Black Mirror. I don't want them sticking that thing in my brain.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is like kind of a tangent on a tangent on a
Yeah.
tangent.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back. So,
Yeah.
so why did he choose a bat in particular?
Well, it's alien enough that it's hard for us to imagine what it would be like.
Mm.
But we have to imagine that it's having some kind of subjective experience because it's similar enough to us biologically.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, his main point is to basically caution people that it's not as simple as providing some kind of explanation about what's happening in the brain
Yeah.
that produces the consciousness.
So he says that, and I quote, "But fundamentally, an organism has conscious mental states, if and only if there is something that it is like to be that organism, something it is like for the organism." And he goes on to say, "We may call this the subjective character of experience."
Mm-hmm.
One thing that threw me about this language at first is the term like, which he does mention this in a footnote, but at first I was thinking, to be like it, is he saying that it needs to be like a comparison to something else in order to understand it? Or does he simply mean that it has to have describable attributes about their experience?
Yeah, I don't think he's using it as a comparative
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's using the word like in kind of a strange way, but I think it's not too hard to
Yeah.
get what he means.
Yeah, it's a colloquial, and he goes out of his way to clarify that. Yeah, that's what he means, just to have describable attributes.
Mm-hmm. But he also says so he says that reflection on what it is like to be a bat seems to lead us, therefore, to the conclusion that there are facts that do not consist in the truth of propositions expressible in a human language. We can be compelled to recognize the existence of such facts without being able to state or comprehend them.
Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so like I think later he mentions that like it's possible there are very advanced alien beings who would have that language and would be able to explain uh, conscious experiences such that we would actually experience them.
Hmm.
I think that's kind of what he means. But our just the way our brains have evolved, we can't do that with our current language.
Yeah, because one of the things that is challenging about understanding something is taking yourself out of the picture. Like to understand lightning again, our only experience of it is the human experience of lightning. All of the physical traits about that we experience and all the things we know about it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, all we're describing is what it's like to experience lightning as a human.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have an alien come down and experience lightning without any concept of what it is to be a human, they're still experiencing physical phenomena, they don't have the same concept of lightning that we do.
Right. Right. Have you heard of the Mary the color scientist thought experiment?
No.
Okay, so that's there's this uh scientist named Mary who her entire life has taken place in this black and white room,
Mm-hmm.
and she studies color and how it what happens in the brain to make us able to perceive it, and it's how different wavelengths work to make us perceive different colors, and she does this for a long time and gets this very thorough understanding and has learned basically every fact about color and how it is perceived in the brain. And then the question is, when she sees the color red, does she learn something new?
Interesting. Wow.
And to me, the answer seems to be a pretty obvious yes, but I don't know about you.
Yeah, it's like on an abstract level, like I could make a case for no. I could say, like, if she really understands everything there is, and I don't mean understand simply in an intellectual sense, but like having a core experience of that. Yeah, that's the point, right? Like, you can't understand it unless you have an experience of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the question, which is, I guess, the same question you had posed earlier about like a sufficiently advanced alien form of communication that could like describe an experience to you and have you actually have that experience, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe it is possible, if you have all of the information about it,
Mm-hmm.
to have that experience.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's wild though, because I think no, I think that doesn't work because all that experience that they could communicate is what it's like for an entity such as them to experience red and not red itself.
Right. I think actually I might have misremembered. Actually, I think I might have misremembered the exactly what he says. I think he says something more like that their language could actually describe fully. They could basically explain consciousness and phenomenology, not necessarily that it would make us experience the color. I think I think that came from like a Vsauce video or something. Also possibly true that such a language could
Hmm.
exist, but I don't know if
Well,
that's what.
I think that connection is okay though, because he begins this article talking about, he brings up the mind body problem, but he also brings up what he calls the water H2O problem and the lightning electrical discharge problem and the
Mhm.
Turing machine IBM machine problem, which I have no idea what he's talking about there.
Yeah, I think that one gets pretty technical.
um, so it's okay because he's already making that connection between like the physical representation of physical objects and our concepts of that, and drawing that connection to the mind body problem.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
So, a really pivotal implication that he's making here to me is that consciousness is inherent in the act of perceiving.
Hmm. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So back to that quote. But fundamentally, an organism has conscious mental states if and only if there is something that it is like to be that organism. Something that it is like to be that organism. So that what that means is to have attributes. Um, so that means to have physical form, right? Like a particular shape. Like there's particular things you can say that describe that particular experience.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and so like to have an experience of something, your physical body, your mental, like the structure of your brain represents what that experience is, right?
Yeah, or maybe not the structure in your brain, but the way it's processing information and the electrical signals that are
Sure. Yeah, and
happening. Yeah.
I bring all of matter and energy into the same category as that structure.
Mm-hmm.
So like your current mental state is a
Mm-hmm.
physical structure that represents the idea of what your experience is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that could maybe be mathematically described.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's this guy who's alive now and working on this stuff, Giulio Tononi, and he's come up with some kind of holistic mathematical theory that attempts to describe it. Um, and something you said also reminded me of what he talks about, like the essential components of conscious experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is basically the first thing is that it's structured so you can like distinguish certain things from other things, right? It's not all just like this like blob of
Yeah,
uh experience.
exactly.
hmm And then also that it's different from every like possible experience you could have, like of the billions or trillions.
Mm.
Um, that yeah, it's distinct and kind of unique. Um, and then also, even though you can distinguish things, you can't really separate them. Like they have to be part of a whole.
Wow. Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And then so that's called integration. And then the last thing he talks about is exclusion, which is that you can only have one experience at a time.
Mm. Okay, that's really fascinating. That ties into some things I wanted to bring up in relation to this article. Um,
Awesome.
yeah. So, so to talk about having attributes to say I am this and I am that is what it is to be there, right? That's kind of what he's saying. Like if X is true about me and Y is true, then I am this identity, right?
Uh, I don't know if he's saying anything about identity. It's more about like the experience itself.
Okay, but I think we can draw a direct connection between the experience and the identity because the physical organism, the structure, represents that experience, right?
Uh,
Like for example, if you're thinking about certain things, like if you get your brain scanned, like certain areas light up, right? And then if you're thinking about other things, other areas light up.
yeah, although they actually so that's called like fMRI,
Uh-huh.
functional MRI, right? And they have actually I saw I think within the last couple months or something there was a study that came out that showed that those areas aren't consistent, like even on the same subjects after a certain period of time,
Hmm.
which doesn't totally like debunk it, but it
Yeah.
kind of punches a big hole in
I
that.
mean, it's interesting because the body is evolving, and I mean, your mind is constantly in flux, right? So that would kind of make sense. But
Yeah.
but the fact that to have a thought changes your mental state, like you can accept that, right? Like,
Yeah, totally.
and I mean changes the physical state of your brain, right?
Mhm.
Like where those electrons are in space.
Mhm.
So what it is to be is to say I am X and I am Y, but I am not Z, right? Like you're not everything. You're saying I have these particular attributes, and that is why I am that identity. I am that physical structure as it is. So when I use this language about identity, to me that's a direct corollary to saying about experience.
Okay.
Like your identity is it's just a different way to phrase it. It's a different language. It's like rather than saying I experience X, you're saying I am the one who experiences X, right?
Yeah, I
It's
mean, well, you could
it's the
couldn't
same
you also just
concept.
say that that it's the same thing as like you like consciousness is the only thing that exists, and you are your conscious experience and not your body, like that kind of thing.
Um, and not well. Tell me more.
Well, like okay, so this is have you ever seen that YouTube it's like a PBS show, Closer to Truth?
No.
It's this guy who just talks to a bunch of scientists and philosophers about like this exact kind of thing.
Mm.
And I just just like binge watched a bunch of those episodes, just like took notes on these different people. So Deepak Chopra is one of these people who believes that everything is consciousness, like everything is made of consciousness, and that's the only thing that we can say to really exist. And he actually has said that biology is an emergent property of consciousness.
Okay.
So like your physical body is a manifestation of you perceiving the region of the universe that your consciousness is coming from.
Yeah, yeah, I've been saying that for years.
Yeah. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Okay, cool. Yeah, but to me, it's important to recognize that the biology is still there, right? It doesn't disappear just because we are the consciousness. We still have that body that represents our consciousness.
Yeah, sure.
And to have an identity is to say that you have particular experiences, if that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. So we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So, right, because if you were wholly infinite, if you were everything, you would have no discernible attributes, and so it wouldn't make sense to say that you exist.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, that's interesting. I don't know about that. Because if like something like panpsychism is true, then the whole universe could be one conscious entity, and we just wouldn't know it because we're this one little piece of it.
Yeah. But yeah, and so there is a question there. But when I say wholly infinite, I'm talking about like true infinity, the possibility of every single experience that could be.
Yeah, I think it would still be the same thing. Like it could be something to be like that whole thing.
I don't think so. I think that that nature of infinity is that the moment you define yourself as a whole unit, you become finite rather than infinite. That is to say, there's always something more than that thing that you've just defined yourself as.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
So infinity plus one, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean when I say that if you were wholly infinite, you would have no discernible attributes, right? You couldn't exist because you can't say I am X and I am Y, but I am not Z.
Yeah. If this dude's theory is correct.
Which I buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can talk about why. But so
Mm-hmm.
what this tells me, though, is that to exist, to be present, you have to be imperfect. You have to be non-infinite. You have to be incomplete, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, now I'm just thinking about like what if infinity itself has something to do with consciousness, and it's like completely the opposite.
What do you mean?
I don't really know, but just occurred to me.
So this, I mean, I haven't read Gödel, but doesn't he have something about incompleteness?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of along the same lines of like they're so kind of like Nagel's talking about with the like a true explanation of consciousness. It might be just outside of our language and outside of the structure of our brain.
Mm.
um, Gödel's incompleteness theorem is that uh, within a certain formal system, like a mathematical formal system for producing logic and stuff, um, there are things that are true that you can write that you can't prove within the system,
Mm.
or you can't get to within the system.
Okay. Like living in a world of where you're just the shadow of a higher dimensional world. Right. I was when I was in Amsterdam, I was living in this really tall apartment building, and I would go out onto the roof in the evening and I'd look down at the shadows of the buildings playing across the smaller buildings in the park, and I was looking at the curvature of the shadow, and at the time I was reading Michio Kaku, so I was pretty influenced by that. Where he starts talking about non-Euclidean geometry and flatlanders, and so
Mm-hmm.
then I was thinking like to have an experience where you're in a finite number of dimensions. It's kind of like you're stuck in the shadow, right? And there's these mysterious forces that are acting upon you that if only you were able to look in that extra dimension, you could see, well, it's not mysterious forces, it's just the form of the higher dimension playing across the lower two.
Right. Like the example I always think of with that is like if you were in a 2D flatland and like a cone passed through your world,
Mm-hmm.
you would just see this like circle that grew bigger
Yeah.
and like grew bigger and bigger and then just like disappeared and you'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. um yeah.
And there's no way to understand that.
It might be kind of related. I mean, the example that he keeps coming back to in Gödel Escherbach, that Douglas Hofstadter keeps coming back to is the statement this sentence is false,
Right.
and if you try to import that into a formal system, weird stuff happens where you can end up proving that there are things that exist outside the system that are
Um,
true, but you can't get to them.
uh,
And people have shown that that's not just true for like weird weird statements like that.
hmm When I was in that sound practices class with Hunter Ewan, so Hunter gave us this homework assignment: create 1 minute or less of audio to convince me of something. Was the assignment, and
Mm-hmm.
Aiden's was like a 5 second clip of himself saying, "I did not complete the assignment."
Wait, Hunter said 1 minute or less.
1 minute or less.
Yeah. Did he pass?
It's impossible to say.
There was one footnote that I thought was like really. So he says, we may imagine something by representing it to ourselves either perceptually, sympathetically, or symbolically. I shall not try to say how symbolic imagination works, but part of what happens in the other cases is like this. To imagine something perceptually, we put ourselves in a conscious state resembling the state we would be in if we perceived it. To imagine something sympathetically, we put ourselves in a conscious state resembling the thing itself.
Yeah, I didn't understand that when I read that. What does that mean to you?
So I think what he's saying by that is that we think we can imagine what it's like to actually perceive something, um, and also be in a different brain state than what would be implied by the thing we're perceiving, but we can't actually do that in reality.
Right.
So he says, where the imagination of physical features is perceptual and the imagination of mental features is sympathetic, it appears to us that we can imagine any experience occurring without its associated brain state, and vice versa. The relation between them will appear contingent, even if it is necessary, because of the independence of the disparate types of imagination.
So what's that saying to you?
So he's saying that the relation between the two can seem like kind of arbitrary or by chance because the two types of imagination are different, um, but they're actually like
Right.
interrelated.
So
I think is
which
what
are
he's
the two
saying.
types of imagination?
So there's perceptual imagination and sympathetic imagination.
And what would be an example of each?
So he says when we try to imagine a mental state occurring without its associated brain state, we first sympathetically imagine the occurrence of the mental state. That is, we put ourselves into a state that resembles it mentally. So if you're trying to uh, like imagine what it would feel like to be at the altar getting married,
Hmm.
um, you'd imagine kind of whatever feelings you would be feeling when you were up there,
Right.
like all the emotions and thoughts that were running through
Hmm.
your head. So that's sympathetic imagination. And then he says at the same time, we attempt perceptually to imagine that non occurrence of the associated physical state by putting ourselves into another state unconnected with the first, one resembling that which we would be in if we perceived the non occurrence of the physical state. So, like, you would imagine yourself, like, not at the altar at all, um, maybe just some unrelated scenario that has, like, none of the overlapping emotions associated with it. Like, I don't know, like doing your homework or something.
Wait, how does that relate to getting married?
Uh, it doesn't. That's the point, that the state is unconnected. So you're the point is that you're trying to trick yourself into thinking that you can have like a you can imagine having your mental perception being in a certain state without actually having your brain being in that state. I think that's what he's trying to say.
I don't get it.
Because he says that's what he means when he says it appears to us that we can imagine any experience occurring without its associated brain state. Like we I think we all have this perception that like we have enough control over our brain to uh, be able to experience something and just like shut off whatever the associated brain state is and just like cut ourselves off from it. But we can't actually do that in reality.
Hmm.
And where that footnote comes in is he said, if mental processes are indeed physical processes, then there is something it is like intrinsically, footnote, to undergo certain physical processes. What it is for such a thing to be the case remains a mystery. If you're enjoying what it is like to listen to this episode, consider supporting us by sharing it, telling your friends, giving us a 5-star review on iTunes, giving us a subscription on your favorite platform. You can find us anywhere you want.
So so at one point he says every subjective phenomenon is essentially connected with a single point of view. What do you think he's talking about here?
Well, I think that kind of goes back to what Tononi was talking about with like the idea of exclusion. You can't occupy more than one like perspective at once.
Cool, interesting. 'Cause I was gonna ask about this. Like I'd be interested to hear how you get to that conclusion, because to me it's an interesting question. Are all entities that share certain attributes somehow actually discrete representations of that one single entity?
Uh, I think so. I mean, what does it mean to share all attributes?
So like Well, so let's say so there's certain things that it is like to be a bat, right? Let's say you spend a
Hmm.
lot of your time hanging around upside down, like he says. Um, you
Hmm.
you have those webbed fingers. So there's a lot of things that each bat, one to another, has in common, right?
Hmm.
And there are definitely ways that they vary as well. There's for every single individual entity, there's something unique about that world state. That's why it is there and not somewhere else, right? That's why it is what
Hmm.
it is and not something else. Every single bat is unique, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
but at the same time, there are things that they share in common that other entities don't share in common.
Hmm.
So, could you take the aggregate of all of those things that they share in common and say that is an entity, that is an identity, and that entity is reflected in each of those spots, but it is really just the one.
I guess it depends what you mean by really is, but uh,
Right.
but I mean, but from our human perspective at least, like our like I don't have access to your experiences. Like they're all kind of islands, right?
But at the same time, there are things that we have in common, common experiences that we can say for sure that we have the same.
Right. Well, have you heard of like the have you heard of the inverted spectrum thought experiment?
No.
So that's like there's no way to really tell if what you see as red, I see as purple,
Oh, sure, sure.
and what I see as purple, you see as red. Like we could be using the same words for the same
Mm-hmm.
phenomena, but we could be experiencing like the exact opposite. And like, uh, I think actually, I think Douglas Hofstadter mentions this in his book, "I Am a Strange Loop," and I think he says that's not likely. Like you could maybe say the same thing about high sounds and low sounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although in that case, uh, high sounds will make your like head vibrate, right, and low sounds will make your chest vibrate.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to imagine that you would experience the two things as opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you were to look in someone's ear and see the different cilia, right, the different little tendrils that are of, I guess, different lengths or different thicknesses, right, so that they
Mm-hmm.
resonate at different frequencies,
Mm-hmm.
you would see the at a lower frequency, the ones that have a longer wavelength are gonna vibrate, and not the ones at the higher end of the spectrum.
Yeah, yeah, and it wouldn't make sense at all that brain states and like sensory data that are very similar would have wildly different effects. But yeah, I don't think it's anything like that you could consider all the experiences to be one. Although I don't know, maybe the experience of like eco death can speak um, to that a little bit.
Interesting. Let's touch back on that in just a second, because saying that all shared experiences are one identity, isn't this basically the same idea as the Jungian archetypes, where you have these emergent conscious like entities that reappear time and time again, reflected in different people and different places?
Yeah, but is that saying anything about they like actually exist as the same people? Like, isn't that just saying that there are like certain things that are common in human psychology? Like, it's not
Um,
saying they're actually the same people.
well, I think Jung would probably have taken it as saying that they're actually the same people. Um, although he did go in for some pretty out there kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, everyone's genetic code is slightly different unless you have an identical twin. So everyone's kind of a snowflake.
Yeah, right. There's certain ways that people deviate, but there's also things that people have in common, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so it's like there is only one experience of what it is like to be X. There's only one entity that is X, right?
Mm-hmm.
So each entity that encompasses the experience of X, but also includes some other experience, say J, is just a variant expression of X modulated by J.
Mm-hmm.
So that entity is X, right? Even though it has J as it in part of it too, it is X from the perspective of how X interacts with J.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if something like panpsychism is true, I could totally see that being the case.
Mm-hmm. So it's like we're taking all these separate entities that have variant expressions of the same identity and kind of structuring them and superimposing them in like a tree structure, right? Like they're each
Mm-hmm.
individual leaves, but they all have the same trunk.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that being true.
Cool. But it's just another way to look at the world, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it is contrary to that thing that you just said that
Mm-hmm.
you can't distill discrete experiences into their constituent parts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a curious point. How did this person get to that conclusion?
Giulio Tononi, that guy.
Yeah. So tell me more
Yeah.
about Giulio Tononi.
All I wrote down about him was those like five components, or four, I guess, four components of consciousness.
Well, we can talk about that some other time.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious to see how he came to that conclusion.
I do kind of want to go back to the ego death thing though,
Yeah,
um,
please.
which I think I actually may have gotten a glimpse of when I did acid on Thursday, and I I was taking a break from listening to the album I was listening to, and I just went to the bathroom and was like looking in the mirror, and was trying to get myself in that place, and I think for I don't know how long, maybe just like 30 seconds or something. um I I felt like there was no separation between me and the rest of the room, at least. Um, and I just wonder if that tells us anything.
So is that what ego death is? Is like an experience without an identity of self? Or just that there's no separation between yourself and the rest of everything?
Yeah, yeah, like it's consciousness without a center. So yeah, people describe it as your sense of self going away, or the sense that you're separate from your surroundings going away. Um, there's
Hmm.
also I think it was Douglas Harding who had uh, this kind of metaphor that works well for a lot of people, and he described it as the feeling of having no head, um,
Hmm.
and it's a little bit interesting because when I think I might have had it, I was looking in the mirror, but um, the exercise is kind of like you observe that you have a body, and then you observe that where your body terminates from what you can see, there's not your head, there's just like the world.
Right. Like you can't see behind your own eyes.
Right, right. And I the way I kind of think about it too is like I don't know. I feel like most people have this perception that it's kind of like that movie Inside Out, where there's like you're inside your head looking at the screen,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? And like you're this little like homunculus riding around in your head, like controlling levers and stuff.
Uh-huh.
But actually, there's no screen. It's just like this is it. Like it's just like
Hmm.
appearing, and you're
Wow.
not separate from it. You just like are the experience.
That's really potent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely had experiences like that.
Yeah. I just wonder if that tells us anything about the nature of consciousness that we can, besides just the self being an illusion, or like the self not being necessary for there to be consciousness.
But if there is a perception of something, isn't that a self, even if it's not the same self that you're accustomed to?
Yeah, well, it is kind of like a semantic thing,
Mm-hmm.
but whatever you call it, uh, there's like a difference between feeling like you're inside your head and not feeling like you're inside your head. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Would that be the difference between, maybe that difference is uh, a transient identity as opposed to a lasting identity?
Interesting. Can you say more about that?
Where, like you have in chaos systems, you have periods of things happening unexpectedly, and then it'll fall into a pattern. You have periods of random things happening and change, right? It's just like unexpected things. And then eventually, at random times, it sort of coalesces into an expected pattern where it seems to get caught in a loop. And maybe that, to be an identity, like a self, that is when you're in a loop. And then to be in the more transient part is to have an experience of not having an identity.
Yeah, that's really interesting. 'Cause I think that could be totally true. Yeah, I mean that book I mentioned, I Am a Strange Loop. That's kind of his whole thesis is that your sense of self is this perception that you are perceiving, and that loop is what
Mm.
creates your sense of self.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I see,
yeah,
therefore I am.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting to ask which animals have that.
Yeah, yeah, like maybe the more complicated the organism, the more entrenched it can become in a loop.
Yeah, like I know certain animals will recognize themselves in a mirror and not think that it's another animal.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if that could tell us anything about it.
Yeah. But actually, maybe, like, if you consider, like, a cockroach, which is kind of a pretty simple organism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it still seems to have a very coherent identity, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
everything that is to be a cockroach, everything that experience is it's pretty predictable, and so that's like kind of like a loop, right?
Yeah, I mean that's more of a loop, and just like the same events are repeating. I feel like.
Mm-hmm. So so so,
Um,
so maybe it's like it is an identity loop. Like, to be a cockroach is a very specific identity, but that identity doesn't encompass a whole lot of experience.
Say the last part one more time.
Well, the identity doesn't encompass a whole lot of experience. Like if you are a loop, and let's say a human is a really complicated long line that's curling way back on itself in weird ways, then a cockroach is like a simple circle with maybe like a little deviation here and there, and then that's it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I would imagine for just for the purposes of self preservation, like every organism has to have some kind of like model of itself
Hmm.
in its brain just to model itself interacting with the world. And
Yeah.
I think that maybe that means that most organisms actually have some kind of sense of self. That just has to do with like self preservation.
Mm-hmm.
But it probably doesn't uh, you know feel the same at all uh, to what we feel as our sense of self if you get far enough away evolutionarily.
Yeah. So here's a question: how far out can we extend this? Like, you can say a human, yeah, they're conscious. Bats, yeah, they're probably conscious. Cockroaches, yeah, yeah, probably, maybe to some extent. And what about like single cell organisms? Like,
Yeah, or even like a tardigrade.
uh huh.
Yeah.
And like for me, I would say there's no distinction. I mean, it's the same thing. It's just a matter of scale. They
Hmm.
they are a loop. Therefore, they are an identity. They have an experience, even if
Hmm.
it's a small experience.
Yeah, yeah, I would probably agree with that. Although like Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like that might be a separate question from whether panpsychism is true. If just like being a living organism that has to think about self-preservation and can, well, I think I don't know, maybe this is naive, but I think being able to move has something to do with it. Like I don't think a tree really has any reason to be conscious because it can't really do anything about, besides just, move towards uh well,
Hmm.
move
I
towards water
I
and
very
sunlight.
much disagree. I think that to be a plant is, if anything, a more pure experience of being conscious.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there there is any reason to make the distinction just because it based on its ability to move. I mean, like to be semantical, there are trees that can walk around. You know that?
Uh, Maybe I heard that at one point, but remind me, like, what kind of?
Yeah, in South America, there's these trees that have roots, and like the trunk is uh where it splits out into roots is several feet above the ground, and over the course of decades, they kind of slide across the ground. They
Wow,
they they, they,
super
they
interesting.
actually walk and considerable distances, whole forests.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, that does kind of connect to I think I mentioned Roger Penrose's theory of consciousness like in one of our earlier episodes, but uh so his theory, which is not not very well accepted, um uh but I think is really interesting because of the way he came about it, is that uh consciousness has something to do with the microtubules in the cells.
Right, I heard about that.
Yeah, and part of the reason he thinks that is that when you go under a general anesthetic, it changes the behavior of the microtubules. Um, and that's a pretty strong, like, every almost everything else in your brain is staying the same, but the conscious part gets switched off like completely.
Hmm.
Um, and it also has something to do with like the structure preserves quantum coherence, so it's like quantum mechanical effects in there as well.
Yeah, yeah, that was his theory, right? I don't know if there was actual scientific evidence to back that, but it is an interesting thought.
Yeah, yeah, and he's like one of the big like heavy hitters of quantum mechanics in the in
Yeah,
the 20th century. It's like so.
that
Um,
field of quantum biology,
yeah,
which totally makes sense to me. I mean, like, if we evolved to take advantage of other physical phenomenon like electromagnetism, which we did,
hmm,
and other things, then why not quantum stuff as well?
yeah, and it makes sense if we're just completely dumbfounded as to how to explain it using like large scale like chemistry and electromagnetism and stuff. It's like we have this whole other branch of physics that that you know a lot of people are convinced can't possibly be it, or I mean there's a lot of like woo woo like new age like, oh, quantum mechanics is, that's what produces consciousness, and
Hmm.
or like DNA itself is conscious, which I think is a really interesting idea, but uh
Yeah.
I doubt it's true.
Well, then we get into conscious, because I had posited earlier when we were talking about ego death that to have an experience without an identity is like a transient identity, right? It's like a transient experience, right?
Hmm.
Um, so couldn't you extend that to um, things that are not like identities, right? Like to be a DNA is a transient experience.
Right. Well, I don't know about that, because I mean like your DNA is pretty much the same throughout your whole life. Uh,
Huh.
Besides, little mutations here and there.
Okay, interesting. So then if we're thinking that cockroaches have experience and have that identity, and microorganisms do, then we kind of have to say that DNA does as well.
Uh, I don't know about that. I mean, yeah, well, it's a yeah. I don't think that that necessarily has to be true.
So, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just a hippie. Um, but I feel like if you extend this out further and further, you you have these smaller loops, right? That are that experience. Um, at a certain point, you have to also encompass inanimate objects and forms that do not have the loop but still can be said to exist, right?
Totally, yeah. I mean, it could very well be that this goes down to the level of like quarks or strings if strings exist.
Mm-hmm. Like every single quark or string or whatever subatomic particle is an experience.
Yeah, or that there's like just like an electron is kind of like a disturbance in a quantum field. Consciousness could be the same way that each of our brains is just a like localized peak in a continuous field. It could be something like that.
Yeah. And so to be able to draw that parallel, then we could have to conclude that every single electron and everything else is conscious.
Right, even if it's a very limited like
Mm.
yeah, very very simple
Yeah,
consciousness.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and in that case, and this is something that is promoted by a lot of people, but Bernard Carr is one of them. That the brain is the brain's role isn't to produce consciousness; it's to limit it somehow.
Hmm.
That it's kind of like
Yeah.
a funnel or like a receiver or something.
Yeah, definitely, because we have to have that discrete identity, right? In order to
Hmm.
be the thing that we are, we have to be able to say, I am X and I am Y, but I'm not Z.
Hmm. Yeah.
So then that kind of implies that in order to exist, well, it definitely implies that you have to have an experience of the finite, but for that to emerge in what is kind of obviously a world that is infinite, that that means that in order to exist, you have to have both an experience of the infinite and an experience of the finite.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting.
And
Yeah,
so,
that's like kind of what I was talking about.
yeah. And so that maybe that junction where the finite meets the finite, that is what consciousness is.
Hmm. That would be really poetic if it was true.
I mean, it seems pretty true, right?
I mean, if panpsychism is true.
Hmm. Well, I don't think we even have to take it that far. I think we can say that because we exist in this present moment, we can extrapolate that there will always be something that exists somewhere in space time. And
Yeah.
so that is an expression of infinity, right?
Uh, yeah, but everything exists in space time, so you can't. I don't know if you can say there's like a causal connection there.
Yeah, no, I'm not implying a causal connection. Just that it's necessary to have both an experience of infinite and an experience of finite simultaneously in order to have any sort of experience.
Yeah, yeah, I could definitely see that being true.
Neat. We got a couple of psychotic hippies doing drugs, hugging rocks.
Thinking trees have souls.
Yeah, jeez. What a fucking bunch of snowflakes. Do you think there's anything then that we always have in common with things that are, in every other respect, completely alien to us?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that kind of gets back to the if it's like something to be that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like at least we have that in common. That like the lights are on, or like something is happening. Um, I mean, well, it does kind of get to the like the problem of like the philosophical zombie, that there could be something that's exactly like us, even something that's exactly like us, where all the same physical processes are occurring, and there's no consciousness. Like there's not. That's part of the other thing that's so mysterious is uh, like evolution. It's not obvious why we evolved consciousness. And it might have
Mm.
just been like a fluke. Like all the same, like perception and avoiding of danger and that kind of thing could still be happening. And you could imagine that there's like you could encounter a being who like appears to be conscious and is telling you how it's conscious, and can you know uh talk about the same problems but nothing is going on. um
Hmm. But not if all of the particles that make up that entity are conscious.
yeah, true, true, but yeah, we don't know that for sure.
Hmm. I mean, I don't know. I'm personally convinced, but I am a hippie, so.
Yeah, I mean, no matter what, I mean, there's obviously something special about the brain, and there's something about living organisms. Like it seems obvious that there is a big difference between that and inanimate objects.
But going back again, what if that difference is just that it's on a different part of the chaos structure, the chaos pattern, where you
Yeah,
have the loop parts are the parts that seem to have a coherent identity, like biological organisms, and the random shit happening part is all the other stuff.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I like that analogy. I don't think I'd ever really heard someone come up with
Ah, thanks.
that.
um, doesn't having an experience of ego death, at least for if you have that experience, doesn't that prove for you that all of this is true?
um, that's an interesting question. Um,
Because to have an experience like that without an identity and yet to still have an experience, you have to recognize that there's something there.
yeah, but at the same time, it's not like you suddenly start experiencing the entire universe. You're still just experiencing the whatever you can sense.
Sure, and I'm not implying that every electron experiences the entire universe, but it's still experiencing something, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm split pretty 50-50 on whether panpsychism is true.
Well, I mean, again, I think we're looping back on the same conversation we had about 10 and 15 minutes ago, because I don't think that we have to go to panpsychism.
Yeah, again, I just think it's really amazing. It just kind of speaks to uh, how big of a question and how hard of a question this is. That this was written like almost 50 years ago, and it's still talked about so much, and we're basically uh, we haven't really made that much progress,
Mm.
even as far as like medical technology and neuroscience has come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the general discourse is still only just starting to embrace this perspective as something other than pseudoscience garbage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think ever since David Chalmers in the 90s, like I think it's more like been more and more mainstream.
Mm.
But yeah, Yeah, but I am hopeful that we'll get at least more of an answer within our lifetime.
Hmm.
Especially as we try to engineer artificial intelligence, that might tell us something.
Yeah. Make it a little bit more plain for us.
Mm-hmm.
A little more accessible.
Although that gets back to the zombie thing. Like, we don't actually know if something is telling us the truth about that it's having inner experience
Well,
or not.
I don't necessarily buy that that's an issue, but that sounds like an interesting discussion for another time.
Yeah. Well, I think we've already gone on for like at least twice as long as the Very Bad Wizard segment on this paper, so take that.
Yeah, take that, Very Bad Wizards. One up you. We're twice as good a podcast because we go twice as long.
Yeah. Length matters.
We're very mature and professional in this podcast.
Yeah.
So suck it, Very Bad Wizards.
What is it like to suck it?
Find out in our next episode. Find out if you meet us after the session.
All right.
I think we're done here.
Yeah.